Hello, everyone. So nice to be here. And tonight I have a special guest, All Power. He is a board certified internist, geriatrician, Schlegel Chair in Aging and Dementia Innovation and Waterloo Research Institute for Aging in Ontario, Canada. He is also clinical associate professor of medicine at the University of Rochester, New York, where he lives. A fellow of the American College of Physicians, American Society for Internal Medicine, and an international educator on transformational models of care for older adults, especially those living with changing cognitive abilities. So cool. So let's see if he's already here.
Good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
Great, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation to be here.
It's a pleasure to be on the show.
Dr. Power, I am always interested in dementia treatment and curious about ways to help, innovative treatments, and the benefits of providing music include better memory, improve mood, decrease pain, increase engagement, and well-being. And it's already known the impact the music can make in patients with dementia. I am a huge fan of Music and Memory Project for patients with dementia. The movie Alive Inside is very, very touching and important for families and recreation therapists, doctors, music therapists, and healthcare in general. And you were interviewed for the film Alive Inside, and you are part of the Medical Advisory Council for Music and Memory. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
For those who don't know this project, could you please talk about this project and your thoughts?
Yeah, it started actually with a social worker named Dan Cohen in the United States. And he began to notice how striking it was when people living with dementia listened to music that was very personal, very special to their lives, very special to certain times in their lives, and how it would seem to reawaken memory and engagement when other attempts at communication had not worked, or other attempts at traditional activities programs had not worked very well. And so he began going on trying to find people that would partner with him to work on this. And he gradually, through knocking on lots of doors and many years, was able to create this group and create this movement to bring small personalized MP3 players with very personalized music playlists to people living with dementia, and even very advanced dementia. And the responses people get when they listen to music that's important to them has been really striking, as you said. And the movie Alive Inside is really a beautiful illustration of that, because you can see live the responses of people who even cannot remember, cannot communicate in normal situations, all of a sudden are communicating in different ways, are remembering, are responding to this. And I think, one of the things that I've discovered is that, with dementia, we know that it's at present an irreversible condition. We are working on new drugs, but so far nothing has been proven to stop or to reverse the progression of neurologic change. But unfortunately, with our focus on medicine in our society, when we see that, we say, well, there's nothing we can do. But there's actually a lot that can be done to engage people, to help people to live as fully as possible. And music is just one example of that. And as you said, it is special because it does get to parts of the brain that are not as affected by different dementia processes, as language, as memory, as other areas. And it actually has connections into areas of language and memory where normal conversation connections might be broken. So people that listen to music can all of a sudden sing along, or can have a conversation that they couldn't have a few minutes before, or remember things that they were not able to access a few minutes before. So it's a very powerful tool, not only for rec therapy, but for anyone who wants to engage with somebody.
Yeah. And this made you write the books?
Well, and that came along a little bit after that, actually. What made me write the books was just being a geriatrician and working for a long time in long-term care and being very frustrated with how we cared for people living with dementia, because it didn't seem that we were helping people to live well. And it seemed like we were using, in particular, a lot of medications that were sedating people who seemed distressed, but we weren't really solving any problems or helping people. We were just sedating them. And I knew that this wasn't the right approach, but I wasn't quite sure what we should do differently. And I just had enough experiences of my own where an engagement with a particular individual created a remarkable improvement. And I knew that there was more to it if we could just figure out how to get to it. And so that's really what led me to write my first book. And I started writing that book 15 years ago almost, and really just trying to figure it out, make it up as I went along, and take all I'd learned about long-term care, take all I'd learned about the culture change movement, because I was very actively involved in that in the US, about how you can transform long-term care and what power that can have, and tried to apply that to dementia and tried to reinvent my view of dementia by putting all the medical stuff aside, not saying it doesn't exist, but saying, yes, there's brain damage, but what else is there? And how can I see the person differently? How can I see my role differently? And that's where the ideas started to come from.
Mm-hmm. And
sorry,
the books.
Yes. So the first book, Dementia Beyond Drugs, was the result of that. And that really was mainly written to challenge the idea of using antipsychotics and other drugs for people, to say these drugs are really not effective, they're dangerous to use, and there are many things that are missing. There are many reasons people are distressed that you are not paying attention to. Not only unmet needs, but there are things about our system and our approach to care that actually are causing distress. And so we need to rethink how we interact with people, how we see people, how we communicate, how we understand what people are saying and doing. And a lot of basic chapters on not only challenging drugs, but on what this whole transformational approach in long-term care was about. And then looking at the specifics of communication and understanding people. And also I had a chapter on looking at activities and how can we reframe the way we look at activities. So that was the first book. And that came out just 11 years ago, actually, at this point. The second book was a few years later, and I had been working with a well-being framework that was developed by some people on a grant from the Eden Alternative Organization. And it had 7 domains of well-being, which they said were important to all people, regardless of who you are or where you're from or whether you live with a condition or not, but that we did not measure or approach very well in our formal assessments or in long-term care. And so I took that framework for the second book, and I rearranged the 7 aspects of well-being in this order that made sense to me. And I applied each one to dementia to understand how that is challenged by dementia and by our care, and how we can use different approaches to enhance those different aspects of well-being. And the different aspects of well-being I used were identity, connectedness, security, autonomy, meaning, growth, and joy. And what are those? What are they for dementia? How can we help to restore those? And that's where the second book came from. And everything else I've done has sort of been an evolution of those 2 basic books.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's right?
Sorry?
Can you hear me well?
There's occasional, you have occasional freezing there, so I didn't get the whole question.
Okay. The main goal of recreation therapists is to help to enhance well-being. Mm-hmm. One of the greatest benefits of recreation therapy is that it focuses on activities that individuals with illnesses or some disabilities can do regardless of their age or limitations. As a result, feelings of isolation are reduced and supportive bonds are created. In your opinion, which recreation and leisure interventions you have seen that are more efficient for older adults with dementia? I know music is very important, but do you consider more interesting programs for the population?
I think less about the exact type of intervention than I do just the principles around how we create engagement for people, because people with dementia are such individuals. Each one is a unique person, and even though they may live with a condition like Alzheimer's or or Lewy body dementia, I don't think they become any more alike than they were before. I think people remain very unique. And so, and the challenges they develop as a result of their condition are very unique too. Each person has their own way of seeing the world, their own way of receiving information, and their own set of abilities and disabilities. And so I don't believe that there is an activity for Alzheimer's or an activity for this stage
Yeah.
of dementia. But really, we need to know the individual. We need to understand that person's abilities, that person's challenges. We need to understand that person's life to know what was important in their lives, and what is meaningful for them to engage with. And so that leads us to challenge some of the traditional rec therapy approaches, because my approach is not stage specific, it's not disease specific. It says, don't worry about what the global deterioration score is, find out who the person is, because two people with the same score could be very different. They're not going to want the same activities. One person could be a married farmer who likes baseball, and one could be a single school teacher who loves crossword puzzles, and they might have the same score, but that doesn't mean anything. And to really think about how can we find better ways to individualize, to be flexible and spontaneous, to really understand how to reach each person as much as possible. And when people live with dementia, the idea of these large activities where you have 20 or 30 people is less useful than it is, I think, for people without dementia, because the ability levels are so different, and the ability to connect and the desire to connect in different ways changes so much. So that's where we really have to be creative in figuring out how to engage people as individuals so that they really can benefit as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm curious to know if we are able to help that patient in some other ways and issues. Like, for example, if a patient with a high blood pressure was benefited by that activity, or if a patient had sleep pills reduced after starting to participate in some activities. And we only have this if we have a doctor to tell us, because you are the one who really knows the patients, their
Well,
health.
yeah, well, this is the part where I can be a doctor, I guess, and say that there is evidence behind those things. Social engagement is good for people, whereas isolation and loneliness is bad for many things, not just your mood, but it's bad for your blood pressure. It's bad for your overall mortality risk. We know these things. We know that if we can engage people in ways that improve their well-being, that we can often take away some of those psychiatric medications, and people do better. Because if you're on a drug like an antipsychotic, which is proven to increase your mortality risk, and we can take you off that drug, then your risk of mortality goes down, your risk of strokes, of falls, all these other things that can be caused by the medication can improve. So there are definitely, yes, many ways we can impact the health of many people with meaningful engagement. Part of it's just social engagement. Part of it's physical engagement. Obviously, the activity, getting outdoors, getting sunshine, all these things that we can do to engage people can have global effects on their overall mental and physical well-being.
Mm-hmm. You said in a Los Angeles Times once, I have seen people get a lot better when they move to nursing homes, because they get many shifts of people providing the care that one tired person was trying to do. They have better socialization, they have people who are more skilled, and all of a sudden they come to life.
Yeah, I've seen that many times, and it's not to say that long-term care is always good or that staying at home is always good. But people often ask me, I'll have friends or family, relatives that will say to me, they'll talk about a relative of theirs who's living at home, who's living with dementia, who's struggling with something or other, and they'll say, how do we know if it's time for this person to move to a different place, retirement, long-term care? And I usually look at that well-being framework, and I say, if you're able to meet people's well-being needs in that situation, it's probably okay. But if you find that well-being is starting to erode beyond the ability of those family members and care staff to support them, if they're getting to the point where they are distressed or fearful on a daily basis, if they're getting to the point where they're being put on dangerous drugs because of their distress, or being medicated to go to sleep at night, or the person who's caring for them is burned out and is getting sick themselves, then they're probably in a situation where they would do better in a formal congregate living place like long-term care. And I have seen people who really were declining, often not so much just their dementia, but their support system was failing. And when you put them, as the quote says, when you put them in a place where you have a more durable support system, you have people with a good approach who get to know the person, who engage them, who can be there for them 24/7, don't have to give them a sleeping pill so that they can sleep, then you do see people wake up. And I would often go to care plans with family members a few weeks after somebody moved in, and we'd stop some of these pills and engage people. And the families would say, my mother looks like she did 6 or 8 months ago. And their question was always, what did you give her to make her look so good? And of course, we didn't give her anything. We usually took something away, or it just was a different kind of support system. And that's not to blame people. It is a superhuman job for a family member to care for somebody all the time. And we know, I think it's a little better in Canada than in the US, but in the US, you can't afford in-home care unless you can pay for it privately. Medicare covers very little after hospitalization. Medicaid covers very little. Long-term care insurance covers some for those who have it. But for the most part, it is very expensive and very difficult to get paid help. So a lot of family members are doing this themselves. Otherwise, they go to the poorhouse. And because of that, it really is a struggle for people. And it's not to blame people if a loved one needs to move to a different living environment. It is often just an overwhelming responsibility to have to support somebody and be their aide and their nurse and their rec therapist and their spouse and everything else all day and all night, every day.
On the other hand, some clients get depressed when moving to a nursing home, right? Loss of control, loss of independence, and feelings of helplessness, and depression. And how can we help in this?
That is one of the double-edged swords of all this, is that it is still a kind of grief, because it is losing many things. It's losing your home. It's losing, in many cases, the sort of flexibility and freedom that you have when you live in your own home and you can do whatever you want when you want. And it's the grief of losing that daily contact with important family members, or with maybe a favorite activity like a pet or something you could engage with at home. And moves are difficult. I mean, we all have trouble moving because you move to a new house or apartment and you can't remember which drawer these dishes are in, or the silverware. But when you have memory problems, of course, moving to a new environment is even more challenging. So we know it's hard to move, but then that's why I say I think we have to see when there's a time when the risks of the move or the benefits of the move outweigh the risks. It's never perfect. So what are some things we can do? Well, first of all, I think people should be helped to be more proactive in thinking about the future. And I work with many advocates who are living with the diagnosis of dementia, and many of them have already made plans. I have a friend who's already with his family touring several assisted living places or around his community, and just saying, listen, I'm fine now, and I hope to be fine for a long time. But let's start, the last thing you want to do is be in the hospital with pneumonia, and you have to get out in 2 days, and you get a list of homes, and you know nothing about them, and you have to choose one where you're going to go live. So when you think ahead, when you plan ahead, when you look around, you can be a lot smarter about that, so that you feel more comfortable about making that decision when the time comes. And then to really find out what are the best places. What are the places that provide the kind of support that a person needs, that provide that flexibility, where you can still be yourself, where you can still be in charge of your life, in charge of your day, where you don't have to follow a rigid schedule that somebody else dictates to you. And one of the most important things, when you have the same people caring for you all the time, and not a rotating set of strangers coming in and providing personal care or doing things to somebody that they don't really know and that you don't know. So by talking about these things, by looking into these things, it's getting a little bit of control in a situation which feels very much out of your control. Anything you can do to control your life, control your future, can give you a better sense of what's down the road. And so I encourage people to have these conversations with their doctors, with maybe elder care advocates. There are people in the community that help with this type of thing, or with anybody you know who's in the business that you can get advice from. I think it's really great.
So back to the music. You're also a great musician and composer, and often performs in long-term care, right?
I have done that quite a bit. Yeah, not as a therapist, but just as an entertainer, basically.
Hmm. And could you tell us about it? Um, how live concert is important to residents, and how it's important to you as a musician, as a doctor, as a human being.
It's been an interesting journey for me in that area. Music's always been important to me, and I've always been good at it. I was born with a very good ear, so that made music easier for me to understand than lots of other people. So I studied music early on. I started in third grade with clarinet lessons, which I took for 10 years. I took a couple years of piano as well, but then I basically self-taught on piano and then picked up the guitar when I was about 14 or 15 and taught myself guitar too. But when I went to the University of Rochester, where I was a pre-med, I actually took half of my courses at the Eastman School of Music, studying jazz and classical composition, and really in one of the premier jazz programs in the country, which was an amazing experience, and got to do some special summer workshops during the summers off from my first 2 years of med school. So I was very seriously into music at that time and getting a lot of formal training. Then I got into residency, internship, and everything, and got too busy to write big band jazz scores and to go to Eastman and take courses. And so I picked up my guitar again. I'd learned a lot of folk music and popular music, so I just started playing guitar again, and I kind of got into the folk music community. And then I applied what I'd known back about 35 years ago to start writing songs on my own. And still mostly in the folk genre because it's easy to do when you're just a guy with a guitar. I'm
Mhm.
not a jazz guitarist, and so I can't play things that are really complex jazz-wise. So I would write mostly folk music, but as I got to meet people and as I got to work with other musicians, I started bringing the jazz back in. And when I started working in long-term care, for a while I kind of tried to keep the two jobs separate. And I think I had this fear that if I went to a coffee house and performed, I wanted people to judge me as a performer. I didn't want them to say, well, for a doctor, he's pretty good. That didn't mean anything. But if people didn't know I was a doctor and they said he's good, then that meant something. So I used to not say that, but my friend Cindy Manxon, who's a wonderful musician, said, you really can't separate. You have to be all of who you are. You have to bring everything you are to your work. And I learned that, and I teach that now in my seminars, that we should all, whether we're a rec therapist or a nurse or whatever, we should bring all of who we are to our work. And so I did start performing in long-term care, and I found it very satisfying. And I do, I actually, in my first book, I have a list of 10 rules for performing in long-term care. But a couple basic ones is I do like to bring in some old songs that people know. And it's amazing how even people with fairly significant memory problems can remember old songs. I'll do a song like Home on the Range, and people know all the verses, even the ones I never knew before I practiced the song. But I also like to challenge people with some new stuff too. I don't think that we just have to keep people in what's comfortable. I think we like to sometimes give them something novel and new to explore too. And I like to explore things that people can sing with, people can tap along with or move to, so that we're engaging our bodies, we're breathing, we're laughing. I do funny stuff, I do serious stuff. I just try to create an experience out of it with as much variety as I can, and really bring that whole thing in. Sometimes I think we coddle people a little bit. We only sing songs about happy things, and we're afraid to sing a song about something sad, But people relate to that too. People love singing sad songs like Somewhere Over the Rainbow. There's a healing sense to those songs. And, anything that, I guess your word is sodage, right? Anything that has that kind of feeling can be very cleansing for people. So I learned, because there were a couple of songs I sang where I thought, I shouldn't sing this to old people because it might be about somebody who's going to die. But people really like those songs too, And so it's really about connecting with the human experience through songs. And I built a repertoire of songs, not just my own, but other people's songs that I really thought spoke to those human experiences as much as possible. And I actually made a recording of all songs about aging. It was my second CD. It's got a couple of my own songs, but it's got a lot of songs from people I've met, friends of mine, who had written songs about getting older. Some are funny, some are serious, and a couple were done live at St. John's Home, where I used to work, with 100 residents singing along, and they're kind of fun. So so I put them together. And most recently, as you know, I have a longtime friend who's one of the leading vocalists, singer-songwriters in the country, Ann Hills. She's made over 20 albums. And when we both got grounded by the pandemic, we had been working on a proposal for an arts residency, and that fell through. because of the pandemic. And so she started sending me lyrics, and I would set them to music and text them back to her, and then we would work on them. And so that became her latest album, which was just released last Friday. And that little bit of music you played at the beginning was from a bossa nova I set her lyrics to. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's a wonderful,
Yeah,
wonderful
same here.
project.
Same here. I spend most of my time parenting, writing songs with my partner and
Yeah.
Schwager. Yeah,
It was very, I called it our dual rescue project. We were both kind of stranded. We were both kind of at a loss, not quite sure where our careers were going and how we should change at this point. Neither one of us is really young, so we're beginning to think, okay, should we stop this? Should we do something differently? What's life going to be like? And this just gave us a chance to really be creative and engage and take our mind off some of the troubles. And so there are 10 songs. 9 of them are Anne's words and my music, and the other one she wrote herself, a tribute to probably her closest musical collaborator over the years, Michael Smith, who passed away last August. And so she wrote a very special song, which is sort of a hybrid between a rumba and a tango. It's a lovely, lovely song that the band kind of created this rhythm and made a wonderful song. It's both sad and kind of celebratory too, because of the rhythm. And so the album is called Accidental August, and it's at annhills.com, and I also sell some on my website, and it's on all the streaming and download sites.
Oh, great! Yeah, I was going to ask you about it. It's all streaming digital.
Yep, you can download it at Bandcamp. You can go to Apple, Spotify, all those places, and get it as well. And once again, from Anne's website or mine, you can buy a physical CD as well.
Great. I believe when you are performing, you observe, when you are performing in long-term care, you observe patients' reactions, and also observe as a doctor. You are performing, but you observe the reaction as a doctor.
Yeah.
Does the opposite happen? Like, for example, you are on your shift as a physician, and you figured out that music would be a key to help that patient in that specific moment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a gentleman, I helped open a couple of homes at St. John's here in Rochester using the greenhouse model, which is a small household model developed in the US. And we have 2 small homes with 10 people in each that are actually about 20 kilometers away from our main campus. And they're embedded in an actual intergenerational neighborhood. It's a wonderful place with very versatilely trained staff who not only work as PSWs, but they also do basic activities. They do the cooking, they share meals, basic housekeeping, and they manage the household with the residents who live there. And there was one gentleman there who actually was a former gym teacher and football coach at my high school here in Rochester. And he had a kind of dementia which caused a sort of a Parkinsonism. So he had a lot of trouble picking up his feet. And the connection between his brain wanting to do something and his muscles was not always there. And so, when you try to get him to walk, his feet would just feel like they were glued to the floor. He just couldn't get started. But when you play music, he can dance. He dances very smoothly. There's no kind of Parkinsonian rigidity at all. And so people learned that they could sing a song when they wanted him to walk to the dining room or something, and he could pick up his feet because he was going with the music. And whenever they had a social gathering, his wife would come in and they would dance, and he was just one of the best dancers there. So it's just one example of a way you can engage people and how it actually affects the brain differently. And there's a researcher, and I can't recall her name, but she's using the tango to help people with Parkinson's disease. People that can barely move, they turn on the music and it's like you flip a switch and they start gliding across the floor. And it's just amazing how the music just unhooks that spasticity that's going on in the brain. So I think we haven't tapped a lot of the potential yet with music.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Some upcoming projects, book?
Upcoming, yes. I'm working on a book, as a matter of fact. My friend, Dr. Jennifer Carson, who is at the University of Nevada in Reno, running a program there called the Dementia Education, Education, and Research Foundation, DEER, D-E-E-R. And she's a gerontologist who got her PhD actually at the University of Waterloo in Ontario with Dr. Sherry Dupuy as her advisor. And Jennifer and I have done a lot of things together over the years, and we're writing a book together. And this book is about a sort of a pet project of mine, and that is to create more inclusive communities for people with dementia. So the idea I've been, ever since my first book, where I made a very controversial statement that we shouldn't have separate living areas for people with dementia, I've been pushing this forward slowly. And we're finally going to write a book that talks about the philosophy behind not segregating people with dementia, and some of the process and some practical steps to creating a more inclusive community. And that community could be in long-term care or retirement, or it could be a dementia inclusive community in our larger community too. But we're going to focus mostly on long-term care and retirement, where there's all this memory care, and talk about how people can actually unlock doors and stop separating people in a safe way, and the benefits it can have for everybody when we do so. So that's our project. We just had a 2-hour conversation this morning talking about where we're at with the book, and we hope to have a manuscript out in the next few months, and maybe it'll be out by the end of the year. You never know.
Great. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Oh, we are at the end, unfortunately.
Oh, so sorry to hear. It's been lovely.
Yeah, it was really, really a pleasure to get to meet you and have you here sharing your experience with us. Is there something that I didn't ask you and you'd like to say?
Well, I'll make another point. I guess I wasn't sure if we get to this or not, but everybody's talking about the pandemic right now. So if I can just say a few words about that. The pandemic has been really difficult, and it's been really challenging. And I was just at a couple of talks last week, actually, in Canada. These I thought were very illustrative, along with some other things I've been at too. One of them was from a rec supervisor at the Village of University Gates in Waterloo, Sunny Tickner-Malton, and another was a webinar that was given by Kate Dupuy, who's at the Research Institute where I work, and she's the head of innovation in aging and the arts. And they talked about the importance of rec therapy, especially during the pandemic, and they talked about the amazing creativity that has been forced upon us by having to physically distance people, by having maybe buildings that weren't built for distance activities, long hallways and small gathering areas, etc. And Kate's done some research that actually showed, interestingly, that there were both some detriments to the rec therapist's health, feeling stressed by the pandemic, but also realizing the importance of what they do and learning how to be more creative, more flexible, more individualized. And a lot of that's what I think we've been talking a lot, and as difficult and as tragic as the pandemic has been, it is actually, there's been some really important learnings. It's taught us a lot about how to engage people more as individuals. It's taught us about how to be more flexible, how to be more spontaneous, how to spend part of our time building relationships or teaching other team members who are not therapists how they can engage people, because we can't be there for everybody all the time. We need reinforcements when you can't gather people in a group. So I think that when we can take a breath and pay attention, there's so much we can learn that we can take forward when times are less stressed, that will be much more meaningful for the people we're engaging. And so I hope that we can all, first of all, pat ourselves on the back for the incredible work people are doing, but also understand that there's a real message in what we've been doing, as hard as it's been. And we can make our support better than it's ever been when things start to calm down.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure, Fernanda.
So much.
We'll be talking music, I'm sure, as well.
Yeah. Okay, everybody.
Good to see you.
See
Good night now.
Monday. Bye-bye.